Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for inviting us at this beautiful conference. My name is Alessandra Pantano, and I teach at the University of California, Irvine. And this is a joint work together with two graduate students, Nikki and Casey. And this work was produced as part of the UCI Math Knot. So this is a great program that we run together with a bunch of graduate students at UCI and a few undergraduate math majors as well. And the UCI Math Math Knot has three components. There is an outreach component, a middle school circle, and a high school circle. And right now, thanks to a grant from the National Association of Math Circle and the Dolciani grant, is all free for students. And the three components, middle school, high school, and outreach circle, they all share the same goal, which is to encourage critical thinking and promote teamwork. And I think our math circle fits perfectly in the spirit of IBL because the students explore and experiment with their math. And so here are some students. You can see them playing with bijection. They're working towards the notion of the numerability. And the other ones are trying to measure the volume of a plastic bottle. Actually, that's just one step towards a broader goal. They need to figure out how many chickpeas fit in the room, and it's a very fun activity. And so the students can work individually, they can work in a group. Sometimes we work in a classroom setting, but it's always a very safe and relaxed environment. One of the rules that we have is that none of us ever lectures. So the circles are led by a graduate student, and none of us ever lectures. So it's all about discovery. And students discuss their solutions as a group. And they have plenty of opportunities to present. Actually, that's their favorite part. They're very proud of their answers, so they just can't wait to go share them. And we want to focus on one of the activities that we developed as part of the Math Circle. That's a workshop on symmetry. And students work using baby wipes, markers, transparencies. They identify the elements of symmetry in a given object, and then they discuss how these symmetries get together to form the symmetry group. And in particular, we look at two kinds of objects, rosettes and wallpapers. So the rosettes are two-dimensional objects that do not have any translation. So all the they only have rotational or reflectional symmetries, while the wallpapers have two linearly independent directions of translations. The wallpapers that we work with were created by Professor Farri at Santa Clara University, and he starts from a picture from daily life, a landscape, for example, applies Fourier analysis, complex analysis, and gets these beautiful periodic patterns. And here is another example that was created starting from a picture of a plate of sushi. And so all the patterns that we use share three features. First of all, they're beautiful, they're artistic, and they have a lot of symmetry, and they have some prescribed symmetry group. And so we developed a variety of activities that deal with symmetry, and here we're going to present only 4 of them. In the first one, students explore rotations and reflections. In the second one, they get acquainted with other symmetries, like translation and glides. Then they work with tessellations. And finally, they explore wallpaper groups. And now I'm going to let Casey and Nikki describe these activities in more details.
Sorry, I'm Nikki. Okay. So the first activity that we put together was a snowflake activity, which you can actually do using materials that are found in most classrooms. You can provide examples of snowflakes to students or have them make their own. And you can ask them things like, what kind of symmetry do you see in a snowflake? Maybe how many mirror lines are there? Do you see any rotations? If you have them make snowflakes, they actually really like questions like, can you create a snowflake with 10 lines of symmetry? Or maybe the most symmetry. Out of all the students in the classroom, they get very competitive, which is really cute. We also like to have them present their solutions. On a projector is really fun because then the whole class can get involved. Or here we have a picture of somebody actually marking up his snowflake that he made himself and justifying his markings to one of our grad student leaders. In our second activity, we provide examples of other symmetries on worksheets or on slides, like translational symmetry and glide reflection. So here they're actually real-world examples for them to see. And we like to ask them if they can give us other examples, or maybe in a more complicated example, can they identify these types of symmetry? So in this picture by Escher, there's definitely translational symmetry, but what a lot of students find interesting is that if you completely ignore color, there's also glide reflections in there also. These are appropriate activities for beginning or intermediate students as a warm-up to just kind of get them involved. We really like them because they're great icebreakers. They're very simple. It gets them working with materials and gets them comfortable presenting solutions that are really straightforward, so they don't feel intimidated discussing them. They're also relevant to a lot of the new Common Core curriculum, to college level classes, and also they demonstrate a lot of nice IBL techniques. Okay. In our third activity, we actually have them working with tessellations of the plane. The materials here get a little bit more complicated. We printed posters at Costco and then laminated them for durability. We also recommend having 2-scale printouts of the posters for them to cut and mark as needed, and also pre-made examples of fundamental tiles, or just tiles that are pieces of fundamental tiles like the ones that I passed out. And this is just to help them interact even more with the poster. And so looking at the poster that you have in front of you, this is one that we actually let the students work on. We would ask questions like, what kinds of symmetry do you see? So we've refreshed you on 4 different types of symmetry, so hopefully some of them start to jump out at you. We can also ask you to mark rotations, reflections, glides, translations, whatever you see. We had them do it directly on the posters on transparency paper so that they could actually, move it around and it was more mobile. And you can ask, what if you only had translational symmetry? Can you find a piece of the poster that you can move around to create the rest of the poster? So this student here actually is trying to do that. And as you can see, the tile that he found is actually very oddly shaped, which is cute because this is a middle school student. In our high school group, they were finding kind of more obvious ones like squares or rectangles. But in our younger students, they're much more creative. What if you can use multiple symmetries like rotations and also reflections? And what if you can use all 4? And here we have our graduate group working on the same activity. Okay. You can also ask a more challenging question. Can you find like a smallest tile required to create the whole poster using the symmetries? So here's an example. And once you have such a tile, can you use the symmetries to move it from one corner of the poster to another? And they actually have fun with that. They like to race across the poster to see who can do it the fastest. And usually, while doing this, they realize that they don't need all 4 of the symmetries. And so a good question is, do you need all 4 symmetries if you want to create the whole poster? So here is a picture of one of our students actually using these tiles to do these activities and to try to answer these questions. We consider this a main activity for our beginning level or intermediate level students, and it would also be a great warm-up for advanced students. We ask more pointed questions to encourage them to kind of explore things on their own in a more guided way. And we also put them in small groups to really encourage discussion and collaboration.
Okay, so I'm going to go into detail mainly about the last activity, which is probably the most challenging of the ones we listed, which is about actually identifying the wallpaper groups. So for this one, in addition to the materials needed for activity 3, we also provide these sort of markup instructions. Well, it's a sheet that has all of the different wallpaper groups. There's actually 17 with the corresponding symmetries marked on the tiles. And then we also would provide solutions to the students after they've attempted to identify the groups themselves. So I'm just going to kind of go through, like, given a wallpaper poster, how the students would identify which group it lies within, like assuming that they had this key in front of them. So for starters, one would want to identify the fundamental tile, which is the smallest region that you can translate and generate the entire plane. So we're not working with any of their symmetries. So you can, we call this the swirls, penguins and petals poster. So in this case, you know, you could begin with some center point of the flower and then look, fixing that point, look at only translations and try to isolate the sort of vectors that are translating these points. And then from that, you can sort of generate the corresponding parallelogram, which would correspond to the fundamental tile. So I'll just go ahead and go through the motions of how one would mark up the other symmetries too. So first, if you wanted to isolate the rotations or the rotocenters, what you do is show the students how to mark basically the order of the rotation at a given point. So can anyone see a rotocenter on the wallpaper? So for example, in the center of the flower, there's a rotocenter of order 3 because there's an order 3 rotation there. There it's marked. You can also find ones on the blue swirls are also order 3 in this case. So for the next rotation, or sorry, symmetry type, that would be reflections. And so we mark these with double lines. So we would have the students sort of isolate these different mirror lines throughout the poster. So here's an example of one that's heading through the flower petals. And you can mark them all up. So lastly, we would look at the different glide reflection symmetries. So these are the hardest to explain to the students about or how to find. So the best way to sort of do it is to sort of interpret them like paw prints. So here's an example of a glide reflection axis. And then here's the others. So if you mark them all up, you do rotations, reflections, and glide reflections. And then here's our sort of an example of a fundamental tile isolated. Now you have the fundamental tile completely sort of marked up, and you can use our handout to decide which group it's in. In this case, it's P13M. He's going to take a moment to sort of look at the students in action.
Okay, so here we have a group of our middle school students looking for rotocenters on a poster. And this is actually one of the more complicated ones. And so what I love about this is that if you look at this transparency that they're working with, they've actually traced over the images of the poster so that while they're turning the picture, they can verify that the images are lining up and they are getting actual, like, a symmetric movement. Here they're looking for mirror lines and also the glide axes. And I love how much they're discussing things with each other, kind of throwing ideas out that don't work, but that's okay. They keep trying. And then here, this is the hardest part, they're looking for the unit cell. So once they've marked up this fundamental tile, they're trying to kind of make it smaller to try to determine if there's any redundant information there and see if they can find the smallest tile that will generate the whole poster. And then once they've done this, they take what they've done, compare it to the list of wallpaper groups that we've given them to determine how to classify this wallpaper. And so this is a great challenge activity for intermediate level students or a good main activity for advanced students, just because it is a lot more formal. We do give them formal definitions, more specific instructions on how to mark up their posters. We give them the actual wallpaper groups, a list of them for them to try to identify each poster with. And it does require a lot more organization and critical thinking.
Okay, so maybe I'll just go over the pros and cons of all of these activities. Okay, so The benefits or the pros of these activities was they get exposure to symmetry. This is a great way to sort of introduce very higher level thinking, you know, like abstract algebra concepts to kids as young as elementary and middle school. It also was a good way to sort of foster and develop group work. And it was very stimulating and exciting because I think, you know, students attend a math circle and they expect to be cranking out problems, and then all of a sudden they're playing with these awesome, beautiful images. It's a very motivating thing. The cons, we found that some students found this, you know, transition from you know, the more rigid and like computational mathematics to something that was very open and visual to be a little bit uncomfortable, and they weren't very used to it. I think another thing too is that this activity catered very much to a visual learner, but not at all to an audio sequential learner. So we would want to in the future probably incorporate some, you know, actually like very concrete, you know, computational stuff throughout this. Another con was that the snowflake activity, if you can guess, was quite messy. It actually did some sufficient damage to our vacuum cleaner, so that's something to watch out for. In terms of the materials, it does take a while to accumulate all of them, but for example, our wallpaper posters that we use over and over again. So definitely it's worth it to do that initial collect up of the materials. This is great because it's incredibly versatile. So we have not only used it for the math circle, we've used it for the club at our university. We've used it for outreach for students who, you know, don't have or aren't coming in with the expectation to be doing mathematics and are able to sort of just dive right in. And we've also used it for even, you know, community college as well. So you can see we sort of broke it down into these different levels, but it appeals to everybody. You just need to know how to tailor it correctly. It's also great because given some university classes, you can take aspects of these different activities and incorporate them into the classroom for all sorts of topics. In particular, my favorite one's the topology applications. So you could sort of take the fundamental tile that I mentioned earlier, sort of restrict that even further to the smallest region that generates the entire poster with the symmetries as well. And that's sort of like quotienting out the plane by this action of a group. And all of a sudden you can start talking about orbifolds in these 3D objects and get them into some very advanced stuff. So as we explained, or as you saw in the slides earlier, this appeals to the Common Core standards as well as promotes some IBL practices as well. So like I said with the extensions, you could, you know, start looking at the notions of orbifolds and topological spaces. You can also, you know, go into more detail about the matrix groups and the Euclidean group associated with this. So there's a lot of great directions and extensions you can do depending on, you know, what kind of group you're dealing with. So I guess our next big project that we're hoping to pursue is actually do another math circle that's more focused around topology. So maybe look more at, you know, genuses, manifolds, as well as, you know, knot theory. So we're going to try to keep this visual math learning alive and then see what we can do with it. So that's it. And please let us know if you have any questions. Yeah.
I'm Elaine Bailey from Piedmont College. I actually teach chemistry, and just so you know, this is really useful for chemistry because we actually do symmetry on molecules.
Right.
And this would be fantastic. I never thought to do it with a picture and have them actually manipulate and unit cells and things. So something to keep in mind that you might try to let the chemist know about it, or scientists, things like that.
Do the 3D.
Yeah, it's actually, I've never I do it with molecules, but I never try to do it with a picture and rulers, and that's a really nice idea.
Yeah, I would say the only worry for the three-dimensional one is I know there's hundreds of the crystallographic
but it
groups
would get the
3D,
basic
but
concepts down,
Yeah.
and looking at symmetry planes, I think would be really nice, especially if they had to come up with them on their own. That would be really nice to let them think, because they have a lot of trouble visualizing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm Dina. I'm from Western Washington University. My question was, can you explain a little bit more by what you mean by markup? What do you have them mark, and how do they actually find the fundamental tile? How does that process work?
You can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for the fundamental tile, first they need to find the translations. So they pick their favorite point, for example, this one. And then they identify all the duplicates of this point. So there is one here, so they have a vector going this way. There is another one here, and you see all of these other, okay, all of the translations. Okay, so they find all the duplicates and they mark them with we give them like colored markers to mark it on the transparencies. And they can draw the corresponding vectors. And then they need to pick two of the shortest vectors that are now parallel to each other. So for example, there is one vector going like this, and there is one going from here to there, but that's longer, right? So they don't want to pick that. They would pick this one and this one. And so these are the two directions of the translation that generate the lattice. So if you extend these two vectors and you form the lattice, and then that will give you the parallelogram, which is the fundamental tile. Okay.
I had a question about, I'm a very visual learner, and sometimes I have trouble communicating with people who are audio sequential. Have you thought much about how to explain this to somebody who is very much not a visual learner? I mean, I could see very obviously how they might struggle with understanding what's going on, and what strategies or points of view have you thought about to address this?
It would definitely depend on the age group, because, for example, if you're dealing with college students, I would definitely be wanting to work with the Euclidean group and matrices in order to get these points across. Like, you can look at matrices in R3 and then actually have this rigid structure and see, AX plus B, where A is some kind of rotation or reflection matrix. And so that's a little bit more concrete.
But I think that the little tiles help a lot, because you see that they're printed on both sides. So they can actually try the reflection. They put it on the image of the poster, and then they flip it along this side. And if it matches the pattern, then this means that this was a reflection axis. This was a mirror line. And similarly, if they think that one given point is a rotocenter, they can actually put this up there and rotate it and see when it matches. And what's the angle? I mean, they can get it really concrete. I think the little tiles help a lot.
I also was reading in a paper recently that you can begin with looking at functions on just the real line and sort of translate these concepts of reflecting with like f of x equals negative x and things like that, and use those kind of tricks to start connecting, these technical things that people who are more used to computations are dealing with to the visual ones, to sort of bridge that gap. But that's something that I definitely still want to kind of pursue, trying to understand and sort of like unite for this activity in the future. Are there any other questions?
All right, let's thank our speakers again. Thank you.